Chapter 2. After the note announcing her safe arrival, a week of silence passed, and then a letter came. There were various suggestions for my welfare, and the rest was the usual rambling information and description Frances loved, generously italicized. And we were quite alone, she went on in her enormous handwriting that seemed such a waste of space and labor. Though some others are coming presently, I believe. You could work here to your heart's content. Mabel quite understands, and says she would love to have you when you feel free to come. She has changed a bit, back to her old natural self. She never mentions him. The place has changed, too, in certain ways. It has more cheerfulness, I think. She has put it in, this cheerfulness, spaded it in, if you know what I mean. But it lies about uneasily and is not natural, quite. The organ is a beauty. She must be very rich now, but she's as gentle and sweet as ever. Do you know, Bill, I think he must have frightened her into marrying him. I get the impression she was afraid of him. This last sentence was inked out, but I read it through the scratching, the letters being too big to hide. He had an inflexible will beneath all that oily kindness which passed for spiritual. He was a real personality, I mean. I'm sure he'd have sent you and me cheerfully to the stake in another century, for our own good. Isn't it odd she never speaks of him, even to me? This again was stroked through, though without the intention to obliterate, merely because it was repetition, probably. The only reminder of him in the house now is a big copy of the presentation portrait that stands on the stairs of the Multitechnic Institute at Peckham. You know, that life-size one with his fat hand sprinkled with rings, resting on a thick Bible, and the other slipped between the buttons of a tight frock-coat. It hangs in the dining-room and rather dominates our meals. I wish Mabel would take it down. I think she'd like to, if she dared. There's not a single photograph of him anywhere, even in her own room. Mrs. Marsh is here. You remember her, his housekeeper, the wife of the man who got penal servitude for killing a baby or something. You said she robbed him and justified her stealing because the story of the unjust steward was in the Bible. How we laughed over that. She's just the same, too, gliding about all over the house and turning up when least expected. Other reminiscences filled the next two sides of the letter, and ran, without a trace of punctuation, into instructions about a salamander stove for heating my workroom in the flat. These were followed by things I was to tell the cook, and by requests for several articles she had forgotten and would like sent after her, 2 of them blouses, with descriptions so lengthy and contradictory that I sighed as I read them. Unless you come down soon, in which case perhaps you wouldn't mind bringing them. Not the mauve one I wear in the evening sometimes, but the pale blue one with lace round the collar and the crinkly front. They're in the cupboard, or the drawer, I'm not sure which, of my bedroom. Ask Annie if you're in doubt. Thanks most awfully. Send a telegram, remember, and we'll meet you in the motor any time. I don't quite know if I shall stay the whole month alone. It all depends. And she closed the letter, the italicized words increasing recklessly towards the end, with a repetition that Mabel would love to have me for myself, as also to have a man in the house, and that I only had to telegraph the day and the train. This letter, coming by the second post, interrupted me in a moment of absorbing work, and having read it through to make sure there was nothing requiring instant attention, I threw it aside and went on with my notes and reading. Within 5 minutes, however, it was back at me again. That restless thing called Between the Lines fluttered about my mind. My interest in the Balkan states, political article that had been ordered, faded. Somewhere, somehow, I felt disquieted, disturbed. At first, I persisted in my work, forcing myself to concentrate, but soon found that a layer of new impressions floated between the article and my attention. It was like a shadow, though a shadow that dissolved upon inspection. Once or twice I glanced up, expecting to find someone in the room, that the door had been opened unobserved, and Annie was waiting for instructions. I heard the buses thundering across the bridge. I was aware of Oakley Street. Montenegro and the blue Adriatic melted into the October haze along that depressing embankment that aped a riverbank, and sentences from the letter flashed before my eyes and stung me. Picking it up and reading it through more carefully, I rang the bell and told Annie to find the blouses and pack them for the post, showing her finally the written description, and resenting the superior smile with which she at once interrupted. "I know them, sir," and disappeared. But it was not the blouses. It was that exasperating thing between the lines that put an end to my work with its elusive, teasing nuisance. The first sharp impression is alone of value in such a case, for once analysis begins, the imagination constructs all kinds of false interpretation. The more I thought, the more I grew fuddled. The letter, it seemed to me, wanted to say another thing. Instead, the 8 sheets conveyed it merely. It came to the edge of disclosure, then halted. There was something on the writer's mind, and I felt uneasy. Studying the sentences brought, however, no revelation, but increased confusion only, for while the uneasiness remained, the first clear hint had vanished. In the end, I closed my books and went out to look up another matter at the British Museum Library. Perhaps I should discover it that way, by turning the mind in a totally new direction. I lunched at the Express Dairy in Oxford Street, close by, and telephoned to Annie that I would be home to tea at 5. And at tea, tired physically and mentally after breathing the exhausted air of the rotunda for 5 hours, my mind suddenly delivered up its original impression, vivid and clear-cut. No proof accompanied the revelation. It was mere presentiment, but convincing. Frances was disturbed in her mind, her orderly, sensible housekeeping mind. She was uneasy, even perhaps afraid. Something in the house distressed her, and she had need of me. Unless I went down, her time of rest and change, her quite necessary holiday, in fact, would be spoilt. She was too unselfish to say this, but it ran everywhere between the lines. I saw it clearly now. Mrs. Franklin, moreover, and that meant Frances too, would like a man in the house. It was a disagreeable phrase, a suggestive way of hinting something she dared not state definitely. The 2 women in that great lonely barrack of a house were afraid. My sense of duty, affection, unselfishness, whatever the composite emotion may be termed, was stirred. Also, my vanity. I acted quickly, lest reflection should warp clear, decent judgment. "Annie," I said, when she answered the bell, "you need not send those blouses by the post. I'll take them down tomorrow when I go. I shall be away a week or 2, possibly longer." And, having looked up a train, I hastened out to telegraph before I could change my fickle mind. But no desire came that night to change my mind. I was doing the right, the necessary thing. I was even in something of a hurry to get down to the Towers as soon as possible. I chose an early afternoon train.